we're going to be looking at polynomial inequalities with sign charts and how you can graph those or know where stuff is. So when we're looking at this, you're going to have something. It's easier if I kind of just give you an example and then explain it off the example. Let's say that we have x plus 2, x minus 4, and x minus 5. And that's supposed to be greater than or equal to 0. So when we're looking at this, we're going to kind of ignore for right now the greater than 0, and we're going to figure out, okay, where are my zeros, okay? So my zeros are located at -2, 4, and 5. So we're going to create a sign chart based off of this. And it's going to be based off of our factors. So what we're doing here, we have options where we're at -2, 4, and 5. And so what this means is if I pick a number that is smaller than -2, okay? So for instance, if I pick -3, if I plug that into this factor, is that going to be, I'm just looking at the sign, is that going to be a positive or a negative number? If I plug that -3 in there, I'm going to get a negative number. Now I'm going to take that -3 and plug it into here. Does that give me a positive or negative number? Negative. I do it again for that last factor and I get a negative. Now I'm going to pick a number between -2 and 4. I'm going to take that number and plug it in. Does that result in a positive or negative? Okay, kind of picking up on where I'm going, I hope. So now I'm going to do the same thing between 4 and 5. Poor choice. We'll just go with 4.5. Sometimes it'll be in the middle. And then I have to pick, finally, a number on the outside here. We'll go with 6. So now we know that all of those factors are going to be multiplied to each other. So the end result here is really what matters. So I have a negative times a negative times a negative. Okay, well that's going to be a negative number. Positive times a negative is going to be negative. Negative times a negative is going to be positive. Okay, all my blues there, I'm going to get a negative. And all my purples there, I'm going to get positive. Here's what this means. This means that my graph is negative from negative infinity, as I start to write an 8, sorry, to -2. My graph is also going to be positive then from -2 to 4. Because I'm using my factors and figuring out based on these signs here at the end where my graph is supposed to be, if it's supposed to be above the x-axis or below the x-axis. So my graph is going to be negative from 4 to 5, and then my graph is going to be positive from 5 to infinity. So if I were to draw a rough sketch of this, really rough here, I have at -2, 4, and 5. Okay, so those are my 0 points. My graph is negative. It's a cubic function. So I know that it's going to come up, hit through my first 0. It's going to stay positive until that 4, because it says to be positive there. I'm going to be below the x-axis from 4 to 5, and then I shoot back above the x-axis from 5 on. So my graph is going to be roughly in this shape. Now, you could do this same thing with lots of different situations. When we're talking about fractions or absolute values, all you're doing is looking for those points of interest, those zero values in which you can set up your sign chart. So for instance, let's say that I have x plus 3 over 2x minus 1 and x minus 2. Okay, so from here, where are your potential zeros, or where are the points of interest? So your points of interest are going to be wherever the numerator is going to equal 0 and wherever the denominator is going to equal 0. So if that's the case, I'm going to have a point of interest in the numerator at negative 3, in the denominator of a point of interest at 1/2, and at 2. So I'm going to set up my sign chart based on this. So your factors, we'll do this one a little bit differently. These are your options, your points of interest, okay? So if I pick a number less than negative 3, so I always like to write it down, what number I'm choosing. So if I pick negative 5, I'm going to set this up as a fraction. Negative 5 in the top is going to give me a negative, divided by, in the bottom there, I'm still going to get a negative for that first factor, and I'm going to get a negative for that factor as well. So that gives me a negative over a positive, which is going to be an end result of a negative. Okay, so now we switch over, pick a number between negative 3 and 1/2. I always like 0. 0 is a good one. So on top I get a positive divided by a negative and a negative. So that's going to result in a positive result. Pick a number between 1/2 and 2. I'll go with 1. So I get a positive divided by a positive and then a negative. So that's going to result in a negative option. And then last but not least, pick a number greater than 2. Go with 3. I get a positive divided by a positive times a positive, which results in a positive. So right there, I can see where my potential sign change is going to happen because I've got it set up based on those different signs. And all I did was pick numbers and substitute them in based on those factors. So the key here is you have to have the factors in order to even set this up. So there might be times where you need to factor your polynomial first before you can even set up your sign chart. When you're factoring, your factors are giving you those potential numbers to figure out those sign changes. So like the negative 3, the 1/2, and the 2. These are points of interest that we're looking at to see if we have a sign change. So that's how we're using our sign changes to figure out what the graph looks like without having to actually graph the function.